Since ancient times, the territories of present-day Ukraine have been deeply intertwined with Russia's history. The relationship between the two countries dates back to Kievan Rus, a powerful Slavic state that existed between the 9th and 13th centuries. Kiev, the current capital of Ukraine, was the center of this kingdom, and its influence extended throughout the region. In the year 988, Grand Prince Vladimir I adopted Orthodox Christianity as the official religion, culturally uniting the territories that now comprise Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. However, this political unity did not last long, as in the 13th century, the Mongol invasion destroyed Kievan Rus and fragmented its territories into multiple principalities. While Moscow emerged as a new power in the northeast, Ukraine fell under the control of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. As the centuries passed, Moscow's influence over Ukraine grew stronger. In the 17th century, Ukrainian Cossacks, who had developed a strong identity of their own, rebelled against Polish rule and sought protection from the Russian Tsar in 1654. This alliance marked the beginning of an unequal relationship in which Russia began to impose its authority over Ukraine. During the 18th century, Catherine the Great consolidated this dominance by suppressing Cossack autonomy and promoting the Russification of the territory. Throughout the 19th century, the Russian Empire imposed restrictions on the Ukrainian language and repressed any attempt at nationalist affirmation. The 20th century brought new tragedies for Ukraine. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, Ukraine experienced a brief period of independence, but in 1922 it was incorporated into the newly formed Soviet Union. Under Stalin's rule, forced collectivization led to the Holodomor, an artificial famine between 1932 and 1933 that caused the deaths of millions of Ukrainians. During World War II, Ukrainian territory became a key battlefield, devastated by clashes between Nazi Germany and the USSR. After the war, Ukraine remained part of the Soviet Union, although in 1954, Nikita Khrushchev transferred the Crimean Peninsula from Russia to Ukraine, an act that at the time seemed symbolic but would later become a major point of conflict. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine declared independence. In the first years after independence, the country oscillated between Russian and Western influence. In 1994, Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum, renouncing its nuclear arsenal in exchange for security guarantees from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. However, internal tensions grew. In 2004, the Orange Revolution prevented the pro-Russian Viktor Yanukovych from coming to power through electoral fraud, but in 2010, he managed to be elected president and strengthened ties with Moscow. The real crisis erupted in 2013 when Yanukovych rejected an association agreement with the European Union in favor of strengthening ties with Russia. This decision triggered massive protests in Kiev, known as Euromaidan, which escalated until Yanukovych was ousted in February 2014. Russia interpreted these events as a Western-backed coup. In response, in March 2014, Moscow took advantage of the crisis to annex Crimea following a referendum that was not internationally recognized. Meanwhile, in eastern Ukraine, in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, pro-Russian separatist groups, backed by Moscow, launched an armed uprising against the Ukrainian government. The Minsk agreements were signed in 2014 and 2015 to try to stop the war in Donbass, but hostilities continued. As the years passed, the situation became increasingly tense. By the end of 2021, Russia began massing troops along Ukraine's border. Moscow demanded assurances that NATO would not expand its influence in Eastern Europe, but received no favorable response. On February 21, 2022, Vladimir Putin recognized the independence of the self-proclaimed republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. 3 days later, on February 24th, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The first days of the invasion were marked by massive missile strikes and bombings in several Ukrainian cities, including Kiev, Kharkiv, and Mariupol. Russia attempted to capture the capital in a swift offensive, but met fierce resistance. As the fighting intensified, Russian forces advanced in the east and south, capturing major cities and establishing a land corridor between Crimea and Donbass. Mariupol, one of the hardest-hit cities, suffered a devastating siege that left thousands dead and turned the city into a symbol of the war's brutality. However, the Ukrainian resistance did not falter. With Western military aid and an effective defense strategy, Ukrainian forces managed to halt the Russian advance in Kyiv, forcing Russia to withdraw from the region in April 2022. From that moment on, the conflict shifted towards the east and south. Russia focused its efforts on Donbass, achieving advances in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, while Ukraine launched counteroffensives in Kherson and Kharkiv. In November 2022, Ukraine successfully recaptured Kherson, marking a turning point in the war. By 2023, the war entered a phase of attrition. With drones, artillery, and long-range missile attacks, both sides continued fighting in a prolonged, grueling conflict with no clear end in sight. While Russia reinforced its defenses in occupied territories, Ukraine received increasing military support from the West, enabling new offensives in the east and south. The consequences of the war have been devastating. In Ukraine, millions of people have been displaced, thousands have died, and the country's infrastructure has suffered immense damage. Russia, on the other hand, has faced significant economic and military losses, as well as growing international isolation. The energy crisis in Europe, caused by sanctions against Russia, has reshaped the global geopolitical landscape. Today, the conflict remains without a clear resolution. While some experts believe the war could drag on for years in a low-intensity state, others warn that an even greater escalation is not out of the question. What is certain is that the consequences of this war will shape Ukraine, Russia, and the entire world for generations to come.